Unfortunately, special delivery is probably canon.
Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs. The Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where I'm the host with the toast, Right Toast, here to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's like we always do. Today's kind of a Noob All Questions episode, but the first question I plucked out is quite long, so I figured that'll just serve as the topic. If you want your questions answered on the podcast, don't forget to send them into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. That's in the description to copy and paste because it is a pain to type out. Our first question comes from Val, they, them. Now that the FNAF 2 movie has come and gone, I expected to see DCI finally debunked or reevaluated, given that this was Scott's chance to enlighten us. Instead, it seems like the movies remain to only reinforce, lore relevance-wise, Charlie and the MCI. This, to me, is a sign that we should be reevaluating our assumptions on the DCI and the MCI, as opposed to shoehorning this theory retroactively. I'm not saying there's no arguments about the DCI, but the way it never comes up, the way the MCI does, screams to me that there's a fundamental misunderstanding. I wanted to ask why the DCI is still so clung onto as a facet of the franchise by most YouTube theorists, as opposed to being, in some form, the MCI. I understand this argument is old, but we have so much more information on this franchise now than when FNAF 2, the game, released. And the DCI still seems to have no direct references, especially in comparison to the MCI, the central pillar of the franchise. I'd like to bring up a few arguments as well. It's the same number of victims as the MCI if you include the puppet. In Help 102 Gravestone Puzzle and Happiest Day, puppet is included with the original victims. Save Them comes from the game number 2 in the franchise, released months after the first game at a time where the MCI didn't have a story. If he was at this point introducing a second killing, it is crazy to me that he would make it so similar to the MCI. This is the point when he thought FNAF 3 was the end of the franchise. In FNAF 3, the minigames to fix the Golden Freddy Spirit birthday used the FNAF 2 animatronics. This was Scott tying the MCI to the FNAF 2 again, if we consider Save Them to be the MCI mentioned in the previous game. Someone used one of the suits, a spare in the back, a yellow one. At the FNAF 2 location, it was known at the FNAF 2 location. It was known at that FNAF 2 the yellow suit was used, but if this was in reference to the DCI, the bodies would have surely been mentioned and the location surely shut down. If the bodies were missing, however, all they would know is now none of them are acting right. All these points lead me to believe we have a fundamental misunderstanding of the MCI. I don't know the franchise well enough to put a theory together myself, but I'd love to see your approach on the Save Them minigame, assuming it is trying to tell us something that could be understood when FNAF 2 released in 2014, or at least after the release of FNAF 3, the first final chapter. I hope that makes sense. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for your question, Val, and less of a question, more just like a theory statement. It's very well put together. So, I see your points here. You're not alone, and you're not the first person to say the DCI seems a lot like the MCI, but told poorly, right? Like, you're not the first person to say that these are probably just different tellings of the same event. Do I think that's the case? No. And I'll give you my reasons for it. Firstly, you're right to point out that the DCI is seemingly never mentioned again, whereas the MCI is referenced every single game. You're right to point out that it's weird that immediately after the first game, it seems like there's implications of a second killing. You're right that, like, all of this you're right about. To me, there's not many ways to explain the DCI in a way that feels satisfying. Because in your explanation, if the DCI is the MCI, we know for a guaranteed fact that the MCI happened at the Freddy's location before FNAF 2. However, the DCI depicts the missing children being strewn about the FNAF 2 location. Furthermore, we know the bodies are hidden in the MCI and stuffed into suits, but in the DCI, they're left just out and about. Granted, we don't know what happens after. Maybe he stuffs them after, but we are physically shown them being out and about throughout the restaurant. So, like, both of those would either have to have a good explanation, which they don't, or they would have to be retcons, which I think is fair. Like, the idea of, like, the layout of Save Them is what's holding the story back. It's like, okay, the layout was wrong, but the concept was right. You know, like, that's fair. So that's, like, not a great explanation for that, but likewise, To explain that DCI is a separate set of killings that have the same amount of kids and happen a couple years apart, but this one doesn't do anything, also isn't a great explanation. It feels kind of shitty. I have in the past made the argument that the DCI was separate from the MCI because William was trying to accomplish something. So what is that something? Well, it depends on the theory. So I Pavlov myself into being tired when I record this podcast. It's like noon, but I can feel my eyes getting heavy recording it. I didn't finish my coffee yet. That's probably the issue. But standing up helps. Because to explain that the DCI and the MCI are two different events, you do need explanation for motive. The MCI, there's people argue all the time, was he just killing to kill? Was he already aware of immortality and this is his experiment? The DCI has way less reasoning. Because, again, the DCI seems like he just went on a killing spree and dipped, and then it closed the restaurant. So what the hell is that even about? Well, in the past, my most recent theory on that was that he was essentially trying to provoke a reaction from suits that he suspected were possessed. But that has a lot of assumptions built around it. That has a lot of, well, this makes logical sense, even if there isn't necessarily evidence for it. I'm also, the DCI is so early in the franchise that a lot of it can be considered retconnable, right? In those first 4 games, Scott is kind of flying at the seat of his pants and just writing the story as he goes. So the idea that he got the location wrong for the MCI and that's what Save Them is supposed to be depicting is fair to bring up. I would, however, argue that the one thing that can't be true, the one thing that, as far as we're aware, cannot be true, is that the MCI happens at the FNAF 2 location, because that would require it to happen at 1987. Furthermore, it would make it so the first Freddy's, the newspaper we get between FNAF 1 and FNAF 2, directly contradict. Because in FNAF 1, the newspapers about the MCI state that after the events, they tried to find a buyer for almost a year before giving up and just letting the company die. FNAF 2, we get a separate newspaper article being like, oh, after only a few short weeks, it stinks that this place is closed, but they're hopeful they'll open again sometime. So not only would that be 2 separate this place has closed down articles, but one of them claims they were at least open for an entire year. The other one claims they were open for a few short weeks is the sister location wording. What is the exact, let me get the exact wording here, just, in an abundance of caution. No, yeah. After being open only a few short weeks, Freddy Fazbear Pizza is closing its doors. And we know for a fact, because the check is next to it, that this place is open in 1987. And we know for a fact that the original Freddy Fazbear Pizza opened in 1983. So this would mean, if the MCI happened here, it couldn't have. Because this is not the first location. If it was only open for a few short weeks, it cannot be open at 1983 and 1987. That just doesn't work. So because this is not the original location, and because we're almost certain that this place was only open for a few short weeks in 1987, it seems incredibly unlikely that the MCI could have happened here. Because all the newspaper articles that talk about the MCI talk about a location that was open for multiple years, which from context from other games is a location that was open in 1983. So this simply must be a different location. So, did the MCI happen during FNAF 2? No. The question we need to instead be asking is Save Them showing us the aftermath of the MCI? And I think the answer is also no. Because it's not just the layout, right? It's not just that Save Them takes place at the FNAF 2 location. It's the fact that it's definitively the FNAF 2 location because the toys and Mangle are there. It would be one thing if it was the FNAF 2 layout with just the original animatronics. I would forgive that. I would be like, okay, that's the layout he had on hand. He used it. He wasn't thinking about it that deeply at the time. Sure. But no, the toys are there. Mangle is there. This is painstakingly a recreation of the exact map of FNAF 2. And it's this map where there's dead bodies all over the place. So, for what it's worth, I think it does make sense that the DCI is a separate event. We have all this information about the MCI pointing it to the original Freddy Fazbear Pizza at 1985. And then all the information we have about Save Them is that it happened at the FNAF 2 location, which isn't open in 1985, right? So I don't see a world where the DCI and the MCI are the same event unless all of Save Them is retconned. The entirety of Save Them is retconned, which, hey, if that's the case, sure. If you want to make the argument that the entirety of Save Them needs to be retconned, and the events took place, but those events took place at the original location after the MCI. Like, the puppet went and got Freddy and tried to get William fought back. Because we do now have evidence that the puppet was at the original Freddy's location, right? Not only was there the prototype marionette design that was already in planning in 1970s, so it would have been ready for 1983, but two, in the Ticket to Fun activity book, we get that brochure where it mentions that the safety wristband is at every Freddy Fazbear Pizza, which presumably would include the first Freddy Fazbear Pizza, which would presumably include the marionette. So to circle back to your question and where we're at on it, people are clinging so tightly to the DCI because so much of it is tied to the FNAF 2 location. And either we need to completely retcon what we know about the DCI to make it into the MCI, or we don't. And typically, people err on the side of not retconning something. So if we're not going to retcon the DCI as much as possible, it needs to take place at the FNAF 2 location. And the MCI, with all the information we have, points to the original location, not the FNAF 2 location. So, all that being said, what do we do with the DCI? What do we do with this mess that is the DCI? My explanation, like I said earlier, was William Afton trying to provoke the animatronics. Why is that? Well, at this point, the MCI has happened. But as far as we're aware, there have been no sightings of weird possessed behaviors. And, some night guards of FNAF 2 started kind of reporting that, but William Afton doesn't seem to be a night guard at FNAF 2 as far as we're aware. So the idea that, man, I really want to see if these things are possessed, but they're not doing anything. I know. Let me remind them of their most tragic thing ever. Let me put on the Spring Bonnie suit and kill kids in front of them. It's extreme, but it is at least an explanation. And it does work, right? The important thing about Save Them is William Afton sees possession firsthand, because the puppet is trying to get Withered Freddy to stop William Afton. William Afton's like, you can't save them, you can't stop me. But in that process, he sees that they're moving. He sees that they're possessed. Even if you want to do the argument of the FNAF 2 movie that Charlotte is the only ghost here, then he at least sees Charlotte trying to stop him, showing him that that the marionette is possessed by Charlotte, again confirming possession is possible. So it's extreme. It's not a great answer, but it is an answer. I think the issue with a lot of FNAF 1 and FNAF 2 speculation is the story was still really actively being written. And there is some just inherent contradictions in the lore we have. So I wouldn't say you're wrong to assume the DCI is the MCI. I would say you need to retcon a few things in a way that makes most people uncomfortable to do so. Which is why I think for the most part that FNAF theorists cling so tightly to the DCI existing, because if not, there's a lot of retconning we have to do. That'd be my thoughts on that. But thank you for your question. Our next question comes from Jack, him. About the FNAF movie directly on this one. My question is about Vanessa's dream sequence in the FNAF 2 movie, in which she's in her police uniform shooting William as he falls from the stairs, to which he is still alive. I believe that this is showing us William in some capacity has already somehow mastered, a form of immortality, which I feel maybe be why he says, I always come back at the end of the first movie, which always felt weird to me, as he wasn't dead yet and had nothing to come back from. Do you think I'm onto something, or am I a bit far? You've got a good point. First of all, thank you for your question. There's a couple ways to interpret it, right? I think the main point of the dream sequence and the main point of her killing him and him still being there is the trauma she has, right? The main point of this dream sequence is that she is traumatized by William, and William can die. She can cut off William. She can never see William Afton again. But no matter what she does, at least until she gets serious help, William Afton is still there in the back of her mind, haunting her. I think that's the main point of the dream. The idea that even if he's dead, he's still there to ruin her life. But it's not impossible to interpret lore here. So you mention, is this a hint to show us that William has already known about immortality? And honestly, more than the dream sequence, him saying, I always come back, before essentially killing himself, to me does say he, at some level, understands possession. And I think it's backed up by the fact that in this dream sequence, we see Circus Baby in William Afton's office. Circus Baby being an animatronic that in the games was basically built to kidnap children in some weird remnant experiment that William Afton was running. So if the sister location animatronics exist in this universe, that does imply, unless proven otherwise, that William Afton was doing either remnant experiments or kidnapping kids to try to figure out immortality. So, that being said, why ever would, how would William somewhat know immortality at this point? It's hard to say. Part of it, there's an interesting thing about the way the FNAF movie is treating William Afton. Because right now, the FNAF 1 movie makes William Afton's motives make very little sense. We know he killed those kids in the missing child incident. And we know he's still fond of the FNAF location. But instead of just keeping an eye on it, keeping cameras on it, or whatever, William Afton seems to be actively recruiting people who have very little background or family to watch the animatronics at the Freddy Fazbear's location in order to strap them to the Shreddy Faz chair. Yeah, to strap them to the Shreddy Faz chair and kill them in a gruesome and horrific way. Why? Why are you doing that, though? It's a really interesting thing about William Afton's character in that first movie is why is he spending all of this time to kill people in the FNAF location with a weird chair contraption? So the idea that he does already know about immortality and this is him getting test subjects, I could see that. And then that would lean on why he says, I always come back. That would lean on why in the dream sequence he gets killed and he gets right back up. He at some level already knows about this, which might be why Vanessa is so afraid of him in the first movie. It's you can't just kill him. You can't just get rid of him. That being said, if that's true, kind of fucked up that she never mentioned it, especially because we put him in a Springlock suit and left. Did she assume he wasn't going to come back if she knows he can? I don't know. She's very secretive in the second movie, so, that's fair. Who knows? That is kind of the whole conflict between her and Mike. But I would say more than the dream, him saying, I always come back right before dying, yes, it is just kind of a cool moment, but I think more than just being a cool moment, it's important to recognize that that is a weird fucking thing to say before you die. I always come back. How do you know that? Always implies you've done this before. That's a weird fucking thing to say. So I'm at one point saying that the dream I don't think is that indicative of him knowing about immortality, but at another point, the fact that Circus Baby exists and he says I always come back before death, maybe he does know about immortality. Maybe there's something in him already. Maybe that's why Springtrap is able to be created. Whatever he's done to himself already is blending with the Spring Bonnie suit. I could see that too. There's a lot of ways to go. I think we're frankly just going to need a third movie. The movies are so different from the games that it's really hard to predict anything about them. But thank you for your question. Our next question comes from Cart, he, him. I saw this tweet, which was really interesting, depicting a scene from Secret the Mimic where we see both Mr. and Mrs. Helpful in boxes, Mrs. Helpful being closed. Can this be evidence towards Edwin being alive? The tweet in general. And yeah, like the question says, the tweet is from the Big Top showroom. There's the two ticket booths, one with Mr. Helpful and one with Mrs. Helpful. The one with Mrs. Helpful says closed. The one with Mr. Helpful doesn't, and you can get a ticket from there. It's from the at FNAF SOTM account. It's like a Fancier the Mimic account. And, yeah, even the tweet brings it up. if Edwin is alive, this is very good visual storytelling. Now, this is one of those things where I don't necessarily want to say it's evidence. Evidence is a heavy word. The idea of like a Mrs. Helpful with a close sign and a Mr. Helpful with not a close sign is a really good visual. It is really good visual storytelling if Edwin is alive. But I don't think it is evidence. Evidence to me needs to be a bit more tactile. I'm honestly, I'm struggling to think of any other examples to pull for the idea of visual storytelling being seen as evidence in FNAF, because frankly, there's not a lot of visual storytelling in these games. But I think it's a really good shout. It's really good to point out. How much of it is just gameplay, the fact that like, we need to know which ticket booth to access, but at the same time, there didn't need to be 2 ticket booths. There very easily could have been just one Mr. Helpful ticket booth where we give him the ticket, or we turn him on, he gives us a ticket, and we go inside. But they chose to add 2 ticket booths, and they chose to make the Mrs. Helpful, the Fiona-based one, closed. Not to mention, this is one room after we learn that Fiona's voice is what creates Mrs. Helpful. Right? This is one room after we get the tape where Edwin meets Fiona, and he's like, hey, I heard you were a puppeteer and you have a really nice voice. Do you want to be the voice for this thing I'm making? And then in the next room, we see the Mr. and Mrs. Helpful where the Mrs. Helpful is closed. So on one hand, I'm like, is it evidence? I'm not sure. On the other hand, I do kind of see it as evidence. And not evidence. I would say this is a really strong visual metaphor. And if you're talking about this, you're making a theory about this, it's good to bring up. I would just bring it up as like, look, the game's kind of suggesting this with the visual storytelling. I guess that's evidence. I don't know. It's weird. It's one of those weird, like, gray areas of just like, can we use this in an argument? Or is this just, you know what? Perfect explanation, I think. This is perfect supporting evidence. I would never hinge a theory on this, but this is awesome to pad the sides of it and make it sturdier, right? It does make me curious about what other moments in the game we see a Mr. and Mrs. Helpful at the same time, and if there's anything we can glean from that. I don't know, but I think it's worth looking into. It's really interesting. But yeah, it's a good tweet. It's a good shout out. Thank you for sending it over, and thank you for your question, Cart. Our next question comes from Annoying Hippo, him. I was wondering who your most and least favorite character in The Amazing Digital Circus is. On top of that, I was wondering if you think they should add a new character to the series, and if so, how would they look and act, considering the fact that how someone looks is their personality. Thank you for your question. I will say, I wouldn't say it's a fact that how somebody looks is their personality. I would say there is character design around the personality loosely, but like Jax? Pomni? Like there are some visual elements there, the idea that Zubul has seemingly body dysmorphia, and it's being exaggerated by the weird pick-apart body they're in. But like Kinger's personality is a chess piece. I don't know. Maybe that's me being ignorant. I didn't see it as the way they look is their personality. If anything, I would say that's a theory more than a fact. Regardless, before we get into most and least favorite, I don't think they should add a new character. Mainly because there's 2 episodes left. It feels really late to add a character. We're getting closer and closer to the end, especially after the most recent episode, which, like, slight spoilers, but there is that huge revelation in the most recent episode that everyone has to grapple with. If we only have 2 episodes left, that's, I think, barely enough time to show how everyone is dealing with the most recent episode and then move on to the finale, let alone adding a new character. Adding a new character would take over the entirety of the last 2 episodes, and I think it wouldn't make for a satisfying conclusion if the last 2 episodes are kind of focused on adding a new character at this point. If there was a second season, if there was going to be more, then there's definitely possible. But Pomni is still the fish out of water. Pomni is still needing to be told things about the circus. Pomni is still the character we as the audience are relating to learn about the world around us. Adding a new character completely just ruins that. It completely throws everything out of whack. It changes the entire dynamic of the show. It would not work. I don't think so. In a way that would feel satisfying. That being said, the closest they could have come to doing something like that is Abel if he was real. Like the idea of like a character who's been here all along, we don't need to spend time getting used to him, he's just here, move on. But like they can't do that. Abel just happened, I don't see a way that they add a character and it feels satisfying at this point in the show. And also like why would they need to as a story point? Characters aren't just for the sake of them. Characters move plot. And we have all the characters we need. We have all the characters we've known. A new character would only serve to slow down the plot at this point. Because instead of, okay, everybody knows what's going on, let's try to do something about it, it's, well, now one person doesn't know what's going on, and we're going to need to stop every 5 minutes and explain it. In other words, I don't see a way they can add a new character without just doing episode 1 and 2 again. Where like episode 1 and 2 were, we need to show Pomni how the circus works, and in doing so, show the audience how the circus works, which is a completely understandable way to do an episode 1. Either a new person enters and they just say, you'll figure it out, and don't explain anything to them, or we do episode 1 again. And I just don't see that. I don't see them doing it that way. But that was my thoughts on that. As far as most and least favorite character, that's tough. I really like all the characters. Because, like, even the characters that, like, annoy me. Like, hey, Jax is like a bad person, but he's written so well and he's so interesting. Like, I don't like Jax. I want to dissect him and study him, So like, I don't want to say he's my least favorite because I love analyzing him and I love like thinking about him. So like, he's not my least favorite character. I don't know. I think if anyone, of the main cast, I really can't think of somebody who I would say is my least favorite. They are all so well written and so well rounded that like I don't look at any one character and go, that's probably my least favorite, because they immediately start making their argument to me. Like, even if we want to be like, oh well, Gangle's kind of annoying. No, after like. Maybe before the fast food episode, it would have been Gangle, but after that, and seeing how much depth Gangle's character has, I love Gangle. Like Zooble, a goat. Jax, an interesting experiment. Pomni, Pomni's like the anchor of the show. Ragatha is like, Ragatha gets on my nerves a lot for the issues that she has too, but they're really interesting ones that are really well written and well reasoned. Kinger is the goat, Kane, I love that sad puppy weirdo AI that we're like trying to figure out what his deal is, and Bubbles the funniest character on the show. So like I love them all so much. I think if I had to pick a favorite character, I might be able to do that, and it might be Kinger. It might be. That's tough. It is still pretty difficult, but I think it's easier than least favorite because I just love all these characters so dearly. I don't know. I think revisiting that at the end of the show will be easier. So we'll see. But yeah, I hope that answered your question, Hippo. Thank you for it. And our last question comes from Cooper, they, them. Do you think special delivery is canon? I swear people just like forgot the game ever existed, but do you agree with game theory about it being Mrs. Afton, or I guess now M1, using the animatronics to collect Remnant to revive William Afton? Or is it an in-universe game? Thank you for your question, Cooper. And to be fair, people forget it existed because it's not playable. Like, people forget special delivery existed because you cannot play it. You can play Forsaken. I think it's called Forsaken, that like fan-made like recreation of it with new stuff added. That's really cool. I play it on occasion. But like, special delivery, you can't access it anymore. That being said, is it canon is a very interesting question. Which, like, okay, no matter how you shake it, special delivery, I think, is canon. The question you're asking, which I think is the more pertinent one, how? Is it, in universe, a game, or was this a legitimate service that Fazbear provided, where you could order animatronics to your doorstep? It's tough. On one hand, I think the easiest answer here is, of course it was a game, because it's insane to think that Fazbear was sending animatronics to people's houses, and it was just killing them sometimes, and nobody had any questions about that. And like, they were having randoms collect remnant and send it into Fazbear. Like, this seems insane. But at the same time, you get the therapy CDs, where therapists at their homes were found with, tear marks that look like a robot did it. And you get the concept that, like, if special delivery was making a bunch of spare animatronics, that sure makes the blob make more sense. And if the emails in special delivery are real, well, fuck, most of the emails from special delivery directly tie to security breach. Like, there's a whole email chain about Vanessa. So, like, it kind of has to be a real game, but it kind of has to be a real service Fazbear provided, but that's fucking crazy. I think part of the reason, besides the fact that it is lost media and you cannot play the game, I think another confounding reason people don't talk about special delivery is it is an insane point of the timeline. It is insane to think about the fact that, yes, Fazbear had a service where you could order an animatronic to come to your house, and sometimes it killed people and nobody cared. What do you mean? What do you mean by that? What do you mean that Fazbear was sending, like, fake Freddys to people's houses, and sometimes it killed people and nobody cared? That's wild. And what do you mean there's just enough remnant in the world that part of this process was having people find remnant and attach it to their animatronic, and then when it went back to Fazbear, they sucked it up and went like, thanks for the remnant, kid? Like, what are we talking about? That being said, there's so much evidence for this being a real thing that happened. I think it has to be. The emails and the blob alone are really good reasons, really good evidence for this to be a real thing that happened. The idea that we get these animatronics that should not have looked like that or should not have been there, well, they were copies made during special delivery. Okay. And we get, all these emails about the security breach Pizzaplex and Vanessa and the team behind special delivery that all are so lore relevant in this game. Unfortunately, special delivery is probably canon. I think that's where I land on that. But thank you for your question. Wait, not to mention the Dark Circus, the Dark Carnival, or whatever it's called, the DLC for that app. That's a huge lore bit. The idea that essentially Fazbear was bringing back Fall Fest, or at least that's what this looks like. If that's a real thing that happened, that's super important. So many theories could hinge on that. Is it? I guess. There's so much weirdness about special delivery that is so incredibly relevant if it's a real thing that happened. So I feel like it almost has to be. But I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you disagree with that. I could see it going either way. For me, there's so much important information. It kind of has to be. But again, thank you for your question. And if you want your questions answered on the podcast, feel free to send them into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. It's in the description, copy and paste, because it's paid to type out. But I think that's where we'll call it today. I don't know exactly where we're at, because on the recording we're at like 50 minutes, but I took a couple breaks. So hopefully we're close to 40. Regardless, I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.